Welcome to the long overdue episode number 18 of You Are Admirable with the incredible Bridget Wilkinson. This episode was recorded at the beginning of 2019 and is finally being released nearly a year later. Bridget is the executive director of the Bozeman Area Community Foundation, and I'm very privileged to have learned so much from her about loneliness, building community, marriage, listening, and so much more in this interview. I trust you'll get out of it at least as much as I did, so stay tuned. Here it comes. Well, of course, the reason that you're here is because you are a very admirable person, and Sky Jones has nominated you and your husband, Tyler.
My dream butt hubs.
Dream butt hubs.
Dream boat, not dream butt.
Oh,
well, I guess both. It could be either, but I call him my dream boat.
Sorry, that was my mistake.
Yeah.
And he, well, among the actual things that are to your name, as far as 20 under 40 and the first director of the Community Foundation and leadership institutes and things of that nature. Sky, of course, mentioned that you and Tyler make this community and Bozeman just a better place. And he also said that you two are an example of what a good relationship should be.
Sky.
Yeah.
So kind.
So questions abound. One of the questions that I have that wasn't exactly Sky's, but is how do you make your guys' relationship a good example?
Ooh. You're just starting out strong.
Oh, starting out strong, yeah, no chit-chat.
How do you make it a good example? I will say for sure, I think for sure marriage is so much work. Like maybe any partnership is so much work, however you define that. But I think we're very fortunate that both of our parents are still married and in thriving relationships. And so I think we've seen a lot of just healthy relationships around us. And I think a lot of our friends and a lot of our family members have just really great examples of partnerships. And I think that's important because I think as you're kind of walking the journey of marriage, being able to look to other people's experiences is so critical. And I think, especially our parents were such good examples and still are such good examples of how you just walk through some of the valleys along with the peaks in marriage and that partnership and that process. But I think I will also say, though, that I think Tyler and I are pretty good at being vulnerable in the space of talking about the imperfections of marriage as well, like the challenges of it just as an institution and how you kind of negotiate things and how you're business partners and how you're roommates and how you have fun together and how you trust each other. And I think one way that I think we are good examples is that we're both really independent people who, we have things that we independently love. We have things that we love together, but we are also kind of our own people as well. But I think we also do a good job of protecting the other person's time to go be them. And I think Tyler is always really good at, you have a annual girls weekend, go and do that thing that fills your bucket. And, this past weekend he went to Red Lodge to do kind of a guy's ski trip thing. And I think making sure that your partner is still thriving in those things of who they were prior to you being in the picture, I think is, I think that's important. I think we do a good job of that.
Yeah. So Sky wanted to know specifically from you, with all of those things that you do, how you maintain your energy and passion. You said you're an extremely energetic and passionate person for all the things that you do, and it boggles his mind, I suppose, as to how you maintain that energy.
I think at a basic level, I'm an energetic person, so I think it's kind of something that comes out of me in some way or shape or form naturally. But I also think that when you are doing work where it's your passions and skills meets a need in your community, it's this never-ending flow of purpose and so I feel like it refills my bucket when I'm doing things that matter and they're things that I'm good at. That I will say, though, that while There are days where it feels like I'm running a marathon. It usually feels like the finish line is coming over the threshold of my front door to my husband, who kind of like picks up the pieces. So I think for better or for worse, I think sometimes our partners or like the people that are closest to us end up being the unfortunate beneficiaries of what's left over. I think sometimes he is the best barometer on burnout for me. Like he can identify it in me prior to even me identifying it. Where he'll just say like, here's what I'm seeing in you, like you're kind of coming to pieces. Whereas a lot of other people wouldn't see that side of kind of crossing the finish line and being exhausted. And I think he's really good in terms of the accountability piece of saying like, I know these things fill your bucket, but they're also burning you out. And like in order like to keep doing those things, you need to take a break, or you need to have better boundaries, or say no to say yes. So I'm really grateful for him in kind of helping me monitor that. But I'm also really passionate about the work I do. And I think that I really feel like, how can I do the most good, like with this very limited time that I have on my hands on this planet, and like, gotta leave this place better than I found it. And there's a really limited time to do that. And so I think that also keeps me motivated, that like there are so many opportunities to create change in our community. It's like just hours in the day. Nice. That's how I feel. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, you said that some people don't see that side of you. Yeah. Sky also mentioned that like everybody has setbacks.
Yeah.
But he says you'd never know with somebody like you. You never show it. And that was kind of another question of like, how, like, do you have setbacks and how do you handle them? It sounds like Tyler helps out with some of them.
Yeah. I mean, I would say my family and some of my close friends and Ty are just like safe spaces when I feel like I'm failing at something, or I feel like I bombed something, or something didn't go well, or I'm burned out, or whatever that might be. I think I'm really fortunate that I have a really good support network of people around me who really, I wouldn't say like support failure, but like kind of encourage it a little bit of like, you're not trying hard enough if things don't bomb sometimes. And so I think that those are the times when like you need your support network the most. And I think there are lots of examples of times that I have screwed up royally, whether it's like professionally or personally. And I would say the majority of those times that resonate with me personally are just times where I feel like I've let somebody down. And so I think those matter way more to me than like professional errors where like I screwed up something and made an error. I think the idea of letting somebody down for one reason or another, I think would be a greater failure to me, and probably something that would keep me up at night more than a professional issue.
Totally. One of the questions I ask sometimes is, what is a big failure in your life? So do you have an example of something of that nature?
Totally. Big time. Well, I have a very public one.
Oh, nice.
I mean, I'm sure I have like a million other ones, but the one that like most comes to mind was that a few years ago, so about 5 years ago, I created an initiative in our community alongside a group of people, it wasn't just me, called Give Big Gallatin Valley. And so the vision behind that was, we want to make giving fun and like exciting, and people to get stoked about giving, and to raise unrestricted funding for nonprofits that they can, you know, they rarely get unrestricted funding. And so we just want to make it this like big 24-hour party, so people would go online to one website, find a cause they care about that's listed on that website, and give to them during that 24-hour period. And so, you know, we were in our year 2 of it. Year 1 had been a big success. We had more than doubled our goal. You know, people were really excited about it. We were gaining really good momentum. And about 10 in the morning, so at this point I'm a staff of 1 with an amazing team of, you know, volunteers and board of directors around me, and obviously my partner and friends. But at this moment in particular, I was like blowing up balloons, as a staff of 1 does, like by myself in a ballroom at like 10 a.m. So the giving day had started at midnight, you know, that morning. And we're at about 10 a.m. at this point. We'd had dollars come in. You know, you could go to the website and see who people gave to. And then I got a call from a woman who I knew in the community. And she said, "Hey, Bridget, I'm trying to give online and it's not letting me." And I was like, "Oh, that's funny. Well, maybe you're not reading the directions closely enough." And so I like kind of walked her through it, and I was getting really frustrated. Like, why is she not understanding this? Like, man, did I create something that's that complicated? And then in like an instant, it hit me that like something was wrong. And so within, you know, about 1 hour, like the initiative completely changed, where nationwide, everybody that was hosting a giving day that day, we were all on the same server, and our giving had broken the server. So many people wanted to give in 24 hours that the server broke, and our website crashed essentially. And there was nothing we could do about it. It wasn't our fault, but it didn't really matter, because in that moment I was really feeling like we're letting the community down. There's so many nonprofits that are invested in this and donors who want to give, and like we can't make it happen. And it was such a beautiful experience of like grace in our community, of people that just like came out of the woodwork. We had like a printing store that like made a bunch of copies of this like check donation form. We had a tech company in town close their doors for the day, and they became a call-in center for credit cards. So like Foundant Technology, all of their employees that day put on headsets, took credit card numbers and donations. It was just phenomenal. We had volunteers around this table tracking every penny to every donor that it went to. It was just phenomenal. And so that evening we had this like finale party that was supposed to happen, where we were like throwing a party for nonprofits to like, yay, look what we did. And I showed up, and probably like an hour before that, I had locked myself in the bathroom upstairs at the Baxter Hotel. I call my brother, and I am just bawling. And I'm like, I've let the community down. This is a disaster. The news station is waiting outside of the bathroom door for an interview with me. Like, I don't even know what to say at this point. He was like, you're fine. Like, your community needs you right now. Like, you need to lock it up, get out there, and like be the leader you know you are. Like, you'll fix these things in the morning, but like in the meantime, you can do this. And so I got outside, did a media interview, and then we had our finale celebration. And I was like, no one's gonna come. Like, this was a total disaster of a day. No one will be here. And we walk into the ballroom, and there's hundreds of people. I mean, it's like packed wall to wall. And they weren't there for me. Like, they were there for each other, because we had all kind of banded together and like risen up as a community to say like, we're not giving to a website, we're giving to causes we care about, and we'll figure out other ways to do it. And there were giving days that closed all over the US that day, and we were one of the few to stay open, and we more than doubled our goal that day, all in just like bootstrapping volunteers that were incredible. And so I gave a speech that night and just said like, this is such a good example of like the importance of failure in a community that gives you grace. Like, nobody, everybody was so supportive, so generous, so kind in what I felt was like my greatest professional failure. So I'm so grateful that, while it was really public and like headlines in the newspaper and like, really rough experience, I think personally and professionally, like I came home that night and my husband had a bottle of champagne and flowers and a little note that said like, I'm so proud of you. So, I'm just so grateful for him. But I think that's an example of like a very public failure, but also that our community is an incredible place to like fail in, and that it's still going to be okay. Or that's been my experience.
Do you have an example of a personal failure then? Those are way more vulnerable, and you don't. This is something that we can always cut stuff out as well.
Totally. I think in terms of a personal failure, it probably kind of goes to the question of like, how do you always have energy? I think that sometimes I just like mostly let myself down. I think like when I think about like a personal failure, like often I'm kind of like the last one that I'm like, oh yeah, I should probably like rest or like maybe have some better boundaries on things. So I would say that's one thing I'm working on, is like not letting myself be the personal failure kind of scenario. But I think that there are also times that like I feel like, because I am a busy person, from the nature of my job and kind of being, one of two employees, I really struggle when people say, I'd love to see you, but I know you're really busy. Or like, hey, do you have time for a call? I know you're really busy. And that feels really crummy, of kind of like I'm letting people down around me. Yeah. So I think that that's something I'm trying to work on, is like creating more space in my life, so that's not the story that's told a lot, either to me or a story I tell about myself, that I'm just really busy. Because I think I think that phrase is just an excuse for a lot of things. So I think that's something I'm working on this year and really recognized as a failure last year, that there were a lot of people around me who loved me and were like, you're really busy. Like you might need to figure that out. So I think that's something that I'm working on for sure.
I've stopped using the word busy altogether, and instead I say active and engaged. Because people say that to me and I can't stand it. They're like, oh, you're so busy. And I'm like, no, I'm active and engaged. For me, I think it's different because I think you are, your calendar is probably a little bit more crazy than mine. With that being said, Sky also wanted to know what you do for time management.
Yeah.
So
No meeting Mondays.
No meeting Mondays, yeah.
I've started that. We'll see how long that lasts. That's a goal. So not doing meetings on Mondays. I think I'm also, there's this really great book called Essentialism. I highly recommend it to all of your listeners and to anybody. Thanks. It's awesome. Super shameless plug. So Essentialism is it's very basic. It's like figuring out what's essential in your life and like cutting out a lot of the rest. And I think while that sounds really obvious, I think sometimes just having permission to do that, not feeling guilty about it, is really helpful. And so I have been working on figuring out like what are the things that are really essential in my life, like my health and my family, my marriage, doing some volunteer activities that like really fill my bucket, and what are things that I'm saying no or saying yes to that, while in the moment, if I said no to them, it would cause me discomfort. So like Brene Brown talks about like 8 seconds of discomfort. Like if you can survive that, you'll not be feeling that like sense of regret for like 2 months that you committed to something that you don't want to do or you don't believe in or you don't care about. So I think I'm trying to focus on that like 8 seconds of discomfort of like just sitting in that and saying like no because, so that I can kind of find, I don't know, more focus in the things that really are filling my bucket. Nice. I mean, I think an example of that is I used to spend a lot of time and energy and, money that I would donate to like supporting youth programming, because I was always told like, you're really good with kids. And while that matters to me for sure, I think what really fills my bucket is being around lonely elderly people. Like that is what absolutely fills my bucket. And once I started shifting that time and energy to that thing, like it doesn't exhaust me anymore. And I don't know, I think it is really renewing.
Nice. Are you a befriender?
I'm not a befriender, but I just heard about this really neat concept that I will run by you today. So it's in Boston. So Befrienders is an amazing program. Sidebar. So I think for me, one thing I'm passionate about is looking at like 10,000 foot like systems. I mean, being at the community foundation, that probably makes sense, but kind of understanding like how things are working in the community. And so one thing I've really struggled with is that you have two populations of people, and this is like well researched, that are very chronically lonely. One being millennials and college students, and the other being elderly adults that often are widowed. And so you have these two populations that are lonely and often have issues with housing. And so there's this awesome app out of Boston where they are essentially connecting the two. So it's like Airbnb for like older individuals to then kind of have this befriender relationship where you make an effort to like once or twice a month that you have dinner together kind of as like roommates. But it is this intergenerational opportunity. And there's a lot of examples around that, of like around the nation of that. But I don't know, I thought it was really inspiring today of like kind of engaging a lot of those different challenges that especially we're facing as a community between affordable housing. We have a large college student population with limited affordable housing, and then a lot of our aging and retiree populations. And I don't know.
Fascinating. Yeah. So back to the things that you do. Yeah. You've got Big Gallatin Valley. You've got Seat at the Table. You've got your husband. You've got hiking. You've got whatever it is. What's your favorite thing to do? What's your favorite thing that you do?
My favorite thing that I do is having a house full of people. Like my favorite noise in the world is being in my kitchen with people I love and that my house is just full and it's kind of noisy and people are eating and people are kind of bustling around and cooking and like having conversation, like that is my favorite thing that brings me a lot of joy. And so I'm grateful that I have a partnership in Ty where he feels the same way. And so a lot of kind of our love language to our friends is just like being a place, like a gathering place. So I think that that is one thing that I do that brings me so much joy. And I think when I'm starting to feel really exhausted or tired, I realize I haven't done enough of that, of just the like drinking wine with people that you love, that you can like be yourself with.
That's great.
Yeah.
Along the same lines, you've accomplished quite a bit. So what is your favorite accomplishment?
Ooh.
Or what accomplishment?
Professionally or personally?
Both. How about?
Ooh.
So what accomplishment are you most proud of, I suppose, is the thing?
I think for sure it's like my marriage. I mean, I would say like of the most rewarding things in my life, that's like the best return on investment and something I'm really proud of because I think it's something that takes work and effort and intentionality around. So I'd say my marriage for sure. I think professionally, I'm proud of doing some scary things, like some things I really didn't think I could do. One of those was becoming the executive director of the Community Foundation. I mean, it was like, I was our first staff person. And I think when I took the job, I didn't really know what I was getting into. I just knew that like community mattered to me and that I was good with people. But there were a lot of other facets of the Community Foundation that were areas that I wasn't really good at. And so that's been a lot of growth opportunities and like being frustrated at times and then being like, oh, like looking back, man, after 5 or 6 years, like I've learned something, like this is really neat. I would say probably also doing my TEDx Bozeman talk about loneliness, my own experience with loneliness. I think that was a story I hadn't really shared with anybody. God bless my parents who hadn't even really heard that story. Wow. So I think that just journey of telling my story about how I was really lonely when I moved to the community, but the conversations that it spurred after doing something that was hard, I think was really so rewarding, of people coming up to me, either talking about how they wanted to be a solution to community loneliness and like telling me their story about how they did it after hearing me, or just hearing my story and saying like, I see you and I see that, and not like really judging me for it, but more so just being supportive. So I think that between my marriage and probably helping to grow the Community Foundation and doing that TED Talk, I think those are things that stand out to me.
Yeah, I've actually shared a lot from your TED Talk.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because after I listened to it, I was like, oh, hell yeah. There's a lot in there that was right in line with what I've been thinking, and
awesome.
And listening to your interview on
Beautifully Equipped.
Beautifully Equipped, yeah, that sort of thing. And you shared one story of a woman that you met in a coffee shop.
Yes.
My question is, have there been other stories now since you did that, or what's your kind of favorite story of people kind of approaching you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that was like my favorite story. That was definitely one of them. I mean, I think people, what I love most right now is like, this happened last week where I have this wonderful volunteer at the Community Foundation who called me and she was like, I heard this thing about loneliness and I want to talk through it with you. And I have been very fortunate. When I started the Community Foundation, I had a board member who was like, hey, we don't really know how to train you, so we're going to get some grant funding to be able to hire you a professional coach to help support you. Oh, wow. Which was like one of the greatest gifts ever given to me. And I remember walking through my TED Talk kind of like outline with my coach about a year ago. And she said something really interesting to me that at the time I was kind of like, that's weird. But now I absolutely see as true, where she said, if this is the topic you want to talk about, just understand that people will want to talk about it more with you. And like, how are you going to feel about that? And so it was like kind of a joke that when I did a TED Talk about loneliness, since then I've had so many conversations with people about loneliness. Like this weekend, I'm keynoting a conference and I'm talking about loneliness in the workplace and like how listening is leadership, and what does that look like to listen and to create community in the place that you work, and like how does that translate? And so I'm like, oh my God, am I the lonely person now? Like, is this my thing? This is like what I talk about now? But it's also something that really matters to me, and I think it really affects our community, and I think it's something that is starting to have more conversation around, thankfully. But I think we have so much more work to do about this feeling of loneliness and how it affects our health and how it affects our community. And but I think you're a really good example, though, of like creating community. I mean, this is a good example of like creating community and getting to know people you wouldn't normally know in a different way, which is like that was the whole point of my conversation, but obviously not a new idea to me. I mean, people are doing it all the time, and it's about highlighting those people that are doing that work.
Nice. Yeah. I feel like everybody can relate to what you had to say too, and then you defining it in such a way was really helpful as well.
Oh, good. Yeah. I mean, I learned a lot through the process. Like there's this really interesting book, and it's like this white cover, and in like black or red letters it says loneliness. And it was written by the lead researcher on loneliness from the University of Chicago. I always slaughter his name. It's like John Cassiopo. And I quote him in my TED Talk, but he did a lot of research about loneliness and how it affects our community. But when I was like preparing for my TED Talk, I was at urgent care because I wasn't feeling well. And I was reading that book in the waiting room. And I'm probably you're in urgent care forever. So you're there for like 2 hours in the waiting room. And so I'm like reading, and they're wonderful people. They're just urgent, like very busy. Yeah. So I'm like sitting in the waiting room and I'm reading this book, and this woman comes up to me and she sits down next to me and she starts making small talk, and they call my name, and I go back into the doctor's office, and I'm like, that was so weird and great, but also so random. And then I realized that she saw me reading a book on loneliness. And she was like, I want to be a part of the solution to this woman who obviously feels lonely because she's reading a self-help book or whatever it might be on loneliness. And I thought to myself, like, how funny. But then I also thought, how beautiful is that? How much I would have killed for that when I first moved to town. And I was super lonely. And what if I would have just worn a sign that says, like, I'm lonely, come please talk to me, because that's all I wanted. And so apparently to carry around a self-help book on loneliness helps, because people, I mean, how wonderful our community is that woman was like, oh, I'll go talk to her. I thought it was just like such a beautiful moment where like it didn't all click with me until like a few minutes later, where I was like, oh, that's what she was doing. That's incredible.
So with your experience, you ended up seeing a therapist.
Yeah.
Was it your therapist who told you kind of about the cycle that happens?
No.
Okay.
Not really.
That was kind of after the word. So I guess my question is, what did your therapist help you with, or what kind of things did you start doing to get out of that?
Yeah. I mean, I think part of it was recognizing that like there are different stages in our life where we are going to experience loneliness, and loneliness is a totally normal feeling. And like it's important to feel lonely at some points in your life. I mean, you're going to typically at like different life transitions, maybe you become a new parent, or you move to a new community, or you start a new job, that feeling is, it's a fight or flight reaction. So like loneliness is, when we're hungry, we eat, when we're thirsty, we drink, when we feel lonely, we're supposed to seek out community. And I think it would have been really helpful in that time in my life for somebody to have said, this is totally normal that you feel this way, and it will get better. And you're going to build a community. You're just not there yet. Like that takes time to build authentic relationships. And I think I know that now in hindsight, but I didn't understand that then. And so I think now in those moments when I start to feel lonely, I think I have this self-awareness of like, this is really temporary for the most part, hopefully. But I think I've also built like tools in my toolkit to like reach out to build community. There's a really interesting book that just came out called Belong. And it's literally this workbook of how you move to a place and build your community. And it talks about like figuring out what your values are, what are things that you love, and then figuring out how to find those communities within your city that you live in. So it's this very like kind of tangible, this is actually how you can not feel lonely and build community. So I think sometimes people need that step by step. I think for me, I just needed permission to know that this was going to be short-term sadness, and that I was going to build some really meaningful relationships and not feel that way anymore. So I think that's what I garnered from that experience and from people around me, whether that be a mental health professor or professional or my family who were really supportive during that time. They just didn't know what they were being supportive of, which I've learned from my family in hindsight, where they said, like, we had no idea it was that rough. And I'm like, well, you helped me. You just didn't know you were helping me. Like, while I didn't articulate what I was struggling with, just showing up for me was really meaningful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And when you moved here, there's something I read somewhere where you had just gotten out of a long-term relationship, or did that affect your move? I mean, and what was that all about, if you mind sharing?
Yeah, wow, you did your homework. Yeah, I was in a long-term relationship with a great human who was my high school sweetheart before I moved here. And I had grown up and gone to college in the same town. And so I think part of it was that I just wanted to move to a community where I was anonymous, especially after kind of graduating from college and just saying, like, I think I want to go to a community where I don't know anybody and just try this myself and be unattached. But I think losing that long-term partnership was really hard and compounded the loneliness for sure when I moved here. I think that was a big challenge that I overcame, but it's totally normal and people are doing it all the time, which is also the hard thing, is that I think sometimes you feel really alone in it, but really, like, so many people are struggling with that as well. Yeah.
Well, I love your definition. So could you define, or could you let us know the difference between what is it, social isolation versus loneliness?
Oh, you're going to test me on my TED Talk. So social isolation is the frequency or number of times that you physically come into contact with another person, whereas loneliness is the disconnect you feel from relationships that you want in your life and those that you have. So a good illustration of that is how people can be in a hospital, for example, and they will be craving seeing family members and having that sense of home or family around them. And maybe they don't get a visit on that day. And so while they're not physically alone, they're not socially isolated, they're surrounded by people that are paid to take care of them. They're feeling really lonely because there's this disconnect between the people you want in the room and the people that are actually in the room. And so, I know I felt that at weddings, for example, like even before I met Tyler, or even when, being married to him and maybe he's not around and you're at a wedding and you're surrounded by people, but you feel super lonely. So I think just like the acknowledgement that you can feel lonely in a crowded room, I think it's important. And feedback I've received since my TED Talk is that people are like, well, you're so outgoing. Like, I never knew that people could be lonely and be as kind of like gregarious as you are. And I said, I think that sometimes I use my outgoingness as like a defense mechanism of like this is a very weird scenario where you're asking me a bunch of questions, because typically I ask people a lot of questions with an effort that they will not ask me them. And so my close friends know this. So I play like high and low with people a lot. So like, tell me about your high and low of the day, start with your low, end with your high. And so like my really close friends know that I'm gonna do everything in my power to kind of get out of answering this myself. And then I'm gonna kind of engage a room, but not really answer it. And so they're like very intentional about making sure that I also respond to that. So I think sometimes people that are really outgoing can fool a lot of people in terms of either thinking that they're not lonely or that, I don't know.
Yes.
Do you feel that way?
Absolutely. The thing that really resonated with me when listening to your talk was the experience that I had in New York City. Yeah. I lived there for a month. I did a house swap with a friend, and it's the loneliest I've ever felt. But I was around people all the time. I mean, you're on the train and there's people everywhere, and it's a terrible feeling, actually. And that's something for me that I actually find very challenging, is to be in public without somebody who I know. I really don't like that experience.
Why do you think that is?
Oh no, now you got questions. Now you're asking me questions.
Yeah. Well, it's curious. I mean, I think it's interesting though. Like.
Yeah. I thought about that. I don't know. It's like maybe it's still an insecurity. Yeah. I'll have to think about that more.
I will say though, like in the research that I did for my TED Talk, there there is so much research about this like very primal need to be in community, like to be known in community. I mean, that comes from a very real place of survival. Like the weak ones of the herd are like the ones that are like outside of the herd. And so, you know, those are typically the ones that are not going to survive. And so from just like a basic primal level, like we're programmed to want to seek community and be in community. And I think just understanding that and why that is and why that's powerful. I think I just have like a whole new lens on like marketing tools and like advertisements and like social pressure and like all of the stuff that comes with not wanting to be alone or not wanting to be lonely. And what do both of those mean? Yeah.
Fascinating. Changing gears a little bit, who'd you say is the most influential person in your life other than your parents?
Other than my parents, the most influential person, that's hard. I mean, like the secondary influential people would either be my husband or my two brothers. And I would say like those three men have shaped me in lots of ways. My two brothers, I hate to like lump them together as like my two brothers, but so I'm the youngest of two older brothers. Evan's 3 years older than me and Andrew's 6 years older than me. They're, I think just like our family unit, like that's where you learn so many things about yourself and your social skills and life expectations. And my brothers have always kind of like loved me from this perspective of like, you can do this, like you're gonna be fine. Like they were never the like very overprotective brothers, you know, when I was like dating or anything like that. They were very much like, make your own choices, like be nice, like, you know, be a kind person, be a good person. So I think they always had high expectations of me, but they were never afraid of, you know, they were never trying to like protect me from my own failures. And I think I really appreciated that they taught me a lot about relationships and about friendships. And you know, I think I have qualities of both my older brothers, and I think those are qualities that I'm really proud of. So in my wedding, they were my two bridesmen. Nice. And like, I really couldn't think of who better to like stand up there with me than my brothers, who've like walked such a long journey with me. And I think they have been very influential in who I am. And I'm grateful that we still have such great relationships and family dynamics. And then Tyler, because he's the dreamiest. And like, as I mentioned before, like he absolutely sees me at my best and worst. And I think one thing I love most about him is that he knows my moral compass and my values. And I think more than anybody in my life can kind of say like, here's what I'm seeing in you that's like maybe inconsistent, which I think is really powerful to like have people do that graciously in your life, to say like, I know you to be better than this in this moment. And I think that's just really important, that I think he helps me kind of recalibrate my compass sometimes.
Well, I'm interested on when your compass kind of goes off.
Yeah. I mean, I have a pretty tangible example as of this past week. So one of the values that I have, I think in life, but also it translates to the community foundation, is something called a lens of abundance. So really feeling like when all of us are thriving, like we're all thriving when somebody else is thriving, kind of scenario. But it was interesting because like on Friday, I had met with somebody who got something that I've wanted for a long time and have worked really hard for. And when I say got something, it wasn't like an award or anything, but it was something I've been working towards for a while. And this person was like relatively new in their role, and something had just kind of like this thing had like come to them. And I was feeling really frustrated by it, of feeling like, man, I've worked so hard. I can't figure out this puzzle. And then this great thing happened to this other person and not me. And I came home and like Tyler was like my safe space, where I was like, I feel so bad saying this right now, but I'm very jealous and like very envious and frustrated. And he straight up was like, this is like not who I know you to be. Like, you know that this is for the greater good, and you know that this is for community benefit. I was like, I know, you're right. And I think I just like needed to like have a moment about it. But I really appreciated having a partner who was like, this is not who I know you to be. Like, who I know you to be is this like lens of abundance, And I know that's how ultimately you'll come around to this scenario. And I know that you're just kind of like blowing off some initial emotion around it. But I was just really appreciated that he kind of like checked that immediately and was like, nope, not even gonna entertain this right now. And I'm really grateful because he was totally right. And like in that moment, I was like, you're right. I'm gonna just check this for a minute. And now I've like come around totally full circle to it. But I think it took my husband being like, this is not who I know you to be.
That's great. Well, it's great that you shared your feelings of that too.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I think that's often important. It's like you have the feeling, so why not do something with it instead of just bottle it up?
But, absolutely.
Cool.
Yeah.
What's something that most people don't know about you?
While I am, a couple things. I don't know.
Couple things. Go
I don't know. Yeah.
Say them all.
I would say that while I'm an extrovert and while I just said that the thing that really fills my bucket is being around a lot of people and hosting people at my house, my other favorite thing is being completely alone. I think in like the times that I'm like in solitude are times that I just really cherish. And I think because I'm not alone a lot because of the nature of my work, that the times that I just get to be in quiet spaces, so I swim a lot, and I swim partially because I love swimming, but also because no one can talk to me, or like I can't talk to anybody else. Like I'm physically in a pool where there's like no conversation. And I really love that time of just like processing and just kind of being alone. And I just really like being alone in general. Like I love going out to dinner by myself. I love exercising alone. Like when people are like, I love going on group runs, I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I don't want to be around anyone. So I think I am a little bit extreme in the fact that like, but I think I'm becoming more self-aware to know when I need both of like my house full of people and to be completely alone.
Nice. Yeah. You said a couple things. Was that?
The other thing is that I'm just learning how to play hockey. I have a hockey game tonight. And I think that like catches people off guard a little bit. But it's been really fun because it's something I'm terrible at. I'm really bad at it. And I think going each week to do something you know you're going to epically fail at and be an embarrassment to yourself and others around you and kind of embrace it because other people are kind of feeling the same way. Like we're all in the same group together. It's been so freeing and liberating. Like I love it so much because it's something, there's no expectations on me that I have to like be good at it. Like people around me pretty much just know I'm not and like love me anyways. And it's awesome. So I would say the fact that I love hockey, I think sometimes like throws people off, but yeah, that'd be the other thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. When did you start playing hockey?
So 2 years ago, I started playing hockey, and then last year I had a hip surgery, and so I took time off, and then I'm back at it again with the beginner league. Greenhorn, highly recommend it. Another plug.
What do you admire most about yourself, and what do you like least about yourself?
I'm going to start with my low and end with my high. What I like least about myself, what do I like least about myself? I think I get frustrated at my inability to have healthy boundaries sometimes. And I think I'm not proud of that. I'm not proud of saying yes to avoid making other people feel uncomfortable or angry or whatever that might be. So I think that's something I'm working on, is like the importance of being more assertive and saying no to say yes to the things that matter to me. And so I would say that's something I don't like about myself, and it's something I'm working really hard to improve. I think something I maybe admire most of myself, which is such a weird question. One thing that I've worked really hard on for the past 5 years is listening, which is very ironic in this whole scenario dynamic because normally I get to be the one asking questions. So this is very, very uncomfortable. I started volunteering for a program. It's a national program. My parents, many years ago, who I admire, had brought this program to their faith community, and I saw how impactful it was, not only in their lives, but also in their faith community and in their community at large. And so I encouraged our faith community to bring it to our community. And it has been the most life-changing experience I've ever had. So essentially it's called Stephen Ministry, which is kind of a weird name. But
it's a great name.
It's like
Stephen Ministry?
Yeah,
All right, perfect.
There you are. So it's about the importance of listening. And so we receive over 50 hours of training prior to starting the program that focuses on the importance of listening and why it matters. And I think prior to this program, I think I assumed I was a good listener. And then I realized I really wasn't. Like, I was actually a pretty terrible listener. And I usually felt like in order to establish like importance in a room, I need to be the loudest person or the funniest person or the first person to speak. And this program totally changed that dynamic. So the way it works is that you are partnered for up to 2 years, sometimes longer, with a person in the community that is in crisis. So however you define that, whether it's usually people experiencing loss. So either they're in an end of life process themselves, or they've lost a partner, or they lost a job or a child, or lost their independence. So there's lots of kind of reasons why people would want what's called a Stephen minister. So I'm considered a caregiver, and they would be considered a care receiver. So it'd be a person, I would have given anything for it when I first showed up into town. So it was a person who says, you know what, I'm walking kind of this hard journey right now. I just want somebody to walk alongside me in it. So they're not a trained therapist or counselor, but we receive training on how to be a really intentional and active listener. And so I was partnered with a care receiver for about 4 years. And so, you know, every week we'd get together and I would say, tell me about your week. And she would kind of walk through the challenges that she was facing. And I learned how to say, like, tell me more about that, which is a really important phrase. But then to like actively and authentically and deeply listen to a person without any intention of creating a response. So like formulating my own opinion or giving them advice. And that has like changed my life. And it's I mean, Tyler will tell you that I'm a better wife for it, that I'm definitely a better listener for sure. And I'm really grateful. So I think that's something I'm really proud of, is that I think I'm a really good listener, but it's only because I've worked really hard at it. And I've seen how it changes the people around you when you deeply listen to them. And also when I'm deeply listened to. I mean, you're graciously giving this to me tonight, so I'm very thankful, but yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah.
What do you see in your future?
I see in my future, I think there have been themes, I think from like a professional standpoint, there have been themes in the work that I do where it's all been based in creating a sense of community. So I used to work for a family homeless organization. And, you know, when I was there, I worked with all the volunteers of helping to kind of create a sense of community around people who are kind of transitioning in and out of housing. And then in my role at the Community Foundation, obviously it's, you know, I'm very passionate about creating a deeper sense of community and belonging for people. And so I don't know what that will translate looking forward. But I know I love puzzles, and I know I love things that really feel impossible and confusing and hard, especially related to community. I mean, going back to that conversation of like younger people that are looking for housing and older people, you know, I love puzzles like that of like, how do we find some long-term solutions to some of these community challenges? So I don't know what that's going to translate for. I love my work at the Community Foundation, and I don't know how long I'll be there for, or how long they'll have me. But I think continuing to help be a part of some problem solving for our community, I think is such a privilege. But community can be defined in lots of different ways. So whether that's statewide community or national community, I don't know. But I'm grateful for the role I have right now. So I don't know in the future. I think definitely a lot of adventuring with Tyler. We're going to take some time off this summer and load up a backpack and travel around. So I'm excited about that. And I don't know.
Good. did you see this for yourself? So your undergraduate was Spanish and public relations, right? And then you got your master's at MSU in education?
You have such a good memory. Yes. You do some serious research. Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think my degrees are so random. And I think not necessarily applicable always to the life I lead, like much to, I'm sure, my parents' chagrin, like, oh. But I think like I'm a lifelong learner and I love learning. And at one point I was like interested in maybe being a professor because I love students and I love that kind of problem solving aspect of them kind of like critically thinking about their life and the community around them and their work. So I don't know. I don't really know how my education is like played directly into my professional life. I think a lot of people specifically that come into philanthropy really come into it like from random perspectives and like had never got a degree in philanthropy. Like a lot of people are like, what is this? But I think obviously hindsight's 2020. And I think had I not moved to Bozeman and become an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer for Family Promise, and then they had the graciousness to hire me on full time for, 4 years. And then I had the courage to call the board president of the community foundation and say, hey, I'm kind of looking for something new. And she said, well, I'm walking a job service to post for the community foundation. I think you'd be great at it. It's a part-time job. Never had a staff person. We don't really know what we're doing. You've never been a director. Maybe this could work. So I think part of it is like hindsight is that while I think education is like critical from just a foundational level, I think sometimes people put so much stress and emphasis on like the specific educational path that like, I don't know, I think sometimes taking some calculated risks in your career and just like kind of going with, here's some things that I feel like I'm kind of good at and here's like the things that don't really feel good and then I'm not good at, which I like have plenty of them. And I think just starting to incorporate more and more of the things that you're good at and that fill your bucket, I think is, I don't know, important as you're kind of like navigating that career path.
Yeah. Is there any question that I haven't asked you that you think I should?
Oh. What's your favorite book?
So Bridget, what is your favorite book?
I'm a huge book nerd and my love language is gifting books and receiving books. Nice. So that's why I asked that. I'm a really slow reader and I wasn't the most gifted academic student in the world. I loved like the people part of education and I'm definitely a lifelong learner, but I'm not good at it. Like I wouldn't say it comes naturally to me.
What do you mean by that?
So my best friend, Jenna, is one of the most brilliant humans like you will ever meet. And her and I grew up on parallel tracks together. And she would go to a class called like Gifted and Talented. And I would go to another classroom where they were kind of like, let's slow down everything for you. Because it's clear that like you're not getting any of these concepts. Like I still say today that like I could give a speech in front of 5,000 people, no problem. I would love that. If you ask me to calculate a 20% tip at a table in front of 4 people, I will freak out. And Tyler does this. Like he'll kind of like do it every once in a while. Like, Bridget, what do you think the tip is? And I just like turn red and I get really upset. But I think it's I think that lends itself to like, I loved school because I loved the social aspect and like the community part of it. But I was never good academically and my parents were very patient in finding me resources to help me. So I think reading was always something that I loved and they always read a lot to me, but it was never anything I was really good at. And so I think as I've gotten older, I really value it. But if I pick up a book and like, I'm not a proficient reader. So it's like, if I don't like it, it's not going to work. But I remember I had this AP English teacher in high school, because it all goes back to that teacher that like changed your world. And I remember we were reading To Kill a Mockingbird. And I remember I came to him like the day I finished it. And I was like, and we got to pick from this like kind of like list of books to read. So he hadn't assigned that and I picked that one. And I said, have you ever read this book? This is a phenomenal book. And he looked at me, he said, I don't know if I have. Can you tell me about it? But in that moment, right, he was like the wonder that I had, like that I had discovered this incredible book. So I read it every year. And I think part of it is this, like, I learn something new from the characters every year in the story, especially in today's political challenges and opportunities. But I also think it's like this milestone for me that, like, every year when I read it, I'm just like reminded of kind of where I started academically, maybe, I don't know. And just like, it feels really validating to read. It's like coming home whenever I read that book.
That's
I love it.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's such a great story.
Yeah.
Just recently watched the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I've never actually seen it. I haven't seen it. I think it's because I've built these people up in my head. So, and when she came out with like to set a Watchmen or something, it was like, maybe it was the book that was supposed to come before it or after it. I like couldn't read it because, so you can't ruin my experience of To Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah.
So good. Nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Do you have one last question?
I do.
Okay.
Yeah. Who's somebody who's a part of your life who you know, who you admire, not your parents or your significant other? What do you admire about them, and what's 1 or 2 questions you would ask them?
I admire a gentleman who I met at the Bacchus pub like years ago. And we kind of became friends in kind of an interesting way. So this kind of goes back to that feeling of like not wanting people to feel lonely. Mm-hmm. So there was a gentleman at the Bacchus who was he was probably in his 80s when I met him. And he was sitting alone, drinking a PBR, and it was like karaoke at the Bacchus. And I said, hi, my name is Bridget. Do you want to come join my friends and I? We're just sitting at this table. We'd love to have you. And from that point on, we became friends. His name is Harold. And Harold is one of the most remarkable community members because his wife had passed away. I want to say it was maybe a year before I met him. And he just made this decision where he said, I want to live life as long as I have it. And so I've always wanted to sing. And so he started singing karaoke, and then he like created this like cult following around him where people would like go just to see Harold. I bet you've seen Harold.
I have, yeah, I know who you're talking about.
Karaoke. But when you actually dig down like into his life, and like he was a mechanic in Bozeman for a long time, and he has kids still here. But one year for Christmas, he recorded a yodeling album because he was just really proud of singing and wanted to share that gift with his kids. So I would say he would be somebody that I would list as somebody I really admire, simply because of the courage it takes to say, like, my partner of all these years has passed, and in honor of them, I'm going to like be brave and live my life like this next chapter. So I would say he would be one. My guess is he's going to turn you down.
Okay, interesting.
So I have a second person.
All right.
So my second person.
What's 1 or 2 questions you'd ask him,
what's
though?
1 or 2 questions?
If he
One
turned you down.
is, what is his favorite karaoke song and why?
Okay.
Like, what does he love to sing and why? And I would be curious to hear him say what he's most proud of in his life. He's a very interesting story, and I think he's a very just great example of a community member that, I don't know, I think he's living his best life. And my life is richer because I know Harold. So that'd be one. Any other questions related to Harold?
That's good.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Second would be a gentleman that I've met. I met him the first week at the Community Foundation because we had given him like a small grant. And his name is Dale Mcnichols. And Dale is a really good example of somebody who sees community challenges and just decides he's going to be part of the solution. Like, doesn't really ask a lot of questions, he's like not worried about whether or not he's qualified to do it. He just like does it. So Dale, I want to say he works at Home Depot, and he decided that it was a really big issue in our community, or he understood that it was a big issue in our community, that people did not have a lot of accessibility to fresh vegetables. And he's like, well, we need to fix that. And he said, the food bank is doing a tremendous job and they just need some help. So why don't I just build a garden and I'll be a part of the solution? So he asked some people in his faith community and said, hey, I know you have some property. Do you mind if I build a garden? And then he kind of acquired a tractor and then acquired some seeds, like leftover seeds. and kind of like bootstrapped this whole scenario. And he created something called God's Garden, where it was like hundreds of thousands of pounds of fresh vegetables that he was cultivating. And he would have all volunteers come out, harvest these gardens, and all like 100% of those things that were harvested would go to the food bank and go to those that just needed fresh vegetables. And I asked him one day, I said, have you ever considered, from a more sustainable model of, maintain your organization, of selling some of the produce and then giving away part of it? And he just looked at me like dead in the eye and just said, why would I ever do that? We have a group of community members who never get the best of anything. Like, this is the least I can do, is give them the best of these vegetables. But I think using this community garden as a tool to engage people was like nothing I've ever seen in our community. Like, he created this movement, and I think he's really going to struggle if you say, I want to interview you because you're admirable. But he is just such a good example to me of this like quiet, humble person that's like moving mountains in our community and doing phenomenal work in his own way, that is beautiful and like making real change, but would never want to be recognized for it. And he was never a gardener, like never a farmer, never any of that, and just said like, we can fix this. So I would say Dale Mcnichols.
Nice.
Or Harold, because either of them are just amazing humans.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for that. Thank you for this interview.
Thank you. This was such a gift.
Thank you for making this community in Bozeman a better place to live. Thank you for being a shining example of how to listen and how to foster good relationships. I appreciate you so much, and I just love you. So,
wow,
cheers.
This has been such a privilege. Thank you so much. Yeah. How fun to just like have this conversation on a Monday evening. Thank you.
Thanks for checking out episode number 18 of You Are Admirable with the amazing Bridget Wilkinson. Thanks again to Bridget. Thanks to Kyle Sorensen for the music. You can support this project on Patreon at patreon.com/youareadmirable. Happy 2020, and of course remember, you are admirable. We'll see you next time.
Yeah, check 1, 2. This is just a casual day in the Wilkinson household with lights and cameras.
With lights and cameras.
Yeah. Coming home from work to wine and cameras. It's totally casual. Yeah. Nothing like a little bit of drunk hockey, because there's no other way to play hockey.